Hey, legends. Bit of a storm in a teacup, isn't it? Old blokes getting all worked up about words. Like they're looking for a scrap in a phone booth. Let's just call a spade or a noun, eh? Creaky! Yeah, you know it? She'll be right, mate, if you just listen. Pronouns! Yeah, we're talking about the pronouns. Sir and man, Mr. and Mrs. Is it he, him, his, or just a bit of a piss take? Piss take. Pronouns, yeah, we're talking about the pronouns. Is it he, is it she, is it them, is it we? Who have the time for that mystery? Mystery. Mystery.
Have you ever met a bloke who thinks words are the enemy?
He says, can't we just be nouns?
Like he's lost his blooming memory.
As if there's more people than words in this sunburnt, dusty land. But he's got his red cap on tight and his head stuck in the sand.
It's so bloody annoying having to be respectful of other people's feces. It's just plain neglectful. Feels better to just not care while I'm sinking a cold beer. It's all about me, mine and mine, living in constant
fear.
Fear. Nothing more offensive than a rainbow agenda. It's all just propaganda from a corporate pretender. How dare they try to sell us stuff by being all inclusive, when the only thing that's certain is their logic is
Elusive, 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 elusive. I mean, money talks too loud, and money walks through the crowd. They don't care about our lives, just the bees inside the hives.
Pronouns. He, she. Wait. Pronouns.
Take a look at the fragile flowers.
It's just a word. Don't lose your powers. Pronouns. Oh, we pronouns.
We only loved in nouns. Check the ego, check the sound.
It's so very annoying for show a little respect.
Treating people like people.
Is a thing that must reject.
It feel better if we be cold and colder than a stone.
Long as me, myself, and I
Can sip on the This is not a protest.
no way,
This is not a statement.
fair dinkum.
It's just a change in the wording. Don't go starting a movement. I mean, how them dare? So bold. Selling stuff to everyone. So cold. If money talks, then money walks. While we all sit in a day. And goddamn, it's just two syllables. Cover. What are you so scared of, mate?
It's not a revolution. It's not a transolution.
It's not a revolution.
It's not a transolution.
It's just the way we are, mate.
Fan out like a lizard drinking.
And you're worried about her, they?
It's just the way we are. Pronouns. Just two syllables. Pronouns.
We pronouns.
You guys want a revolution. It's not gonna be no outback transolution. And I ain't talking about no Subaru, mate. tried to plant a garden, gave it all my care. Watered every seed with hope in the air. I dreamed of blooms where love could be shown, but in this barren land, no fucks are grown. The sun beats down, the dirt is dry. Nothing sprouts no matter how hard I try. And the wind rolls through like a ghostly pluck, bringing only the tumbleweeds of fuck. Oh, the tumbleweeds of fuck, they're all that's left, blowing through a world where hearts are theft. No fucks grow here and none are given, no fucks are known and none forgiven. They tumble and they spin like a dry old luck, rolling through the emptiness, the tumbleweeds of fuck. I asked the sky to rain a little care, but the clouds just laughed and left the air bare. I sowed my love in rows so neat, but all that came up were the weeds of defeat. The cactus shrugged, the sagebrush sighs, and the tumbleweeds dance beneath empty skies. A lonely ballet, a dusty parade, in a land where no fucks are ever made. Oh, the tumbleweeds of fuck, they're all that's left, flowing through a world where hearts are theft. No fucks grow here and none are given, no fucks are known and none forgiven. They tumble and they spin like a dry old luck, rolling through the emptiness, the tumbleweeds of fuck. You see, some folks say, why plant it all when the seeds just withered and the dry winds call? But me, I'll tip my hat, sing to the dust, and honor the tumbleweeds, the tumbleweeds of fuck. Oh, the tumbleweeds of fuck, they're all that's left, blowing through a world where hearts are theft. No fucks grow here and none are given, no fucks are known and none forgiven. They tumble and they spin like a dry old luck. So if you wander through a land so stark, where nothing blooms but the empty dark, tip your hat, let out a little chuck, and wave to the tumbleweeds, the tumbleweeds of fuck.
Hello, hello. little afternoon stream here in the great land of Oz. It is 2:20 in the afternoon on the, what day is it? Monday. It's Monday. Haven't streamed for a while. Had a bit of time this afternoon and thought, I might just do one. I saw a video the other day, yesterday I think, that I thought was interesting. I used to follow quite a lot of the discussions online about feminism and the gender wars, so-called. And haven't been watching it for a while. I think I pretty much got what I needed to get. And then I come across this video, just came up in my algorithm while I was looking around and thought, pretty base conversation, actually. So the person behind the channel, I think it's called Psychobabble, she's interviewing a lady called Dr. Danny Sulikowski, who's an Australian at Sturt University, James Sturt University. And she had some pretty based things to say. So I thought it was worth just doing a little review. I kind of liked what I saw. I was surprised to see an Australian being, especially a university professor or someone working at a university here, being able to speak so openly about these issues, because it goes completely counter to the narrative. So basically, they're going to discuss, Dr. Danny has this theory that, she has a theory that the basis of feminism is intra-sexual competition between women. So women trying to prevent other women from succeeding. She's taken a evolutionary, a psychological evolutionary perspective, which I'm not completely convinced about, but it's an interesting take. I compare it to Rachel Wilson's take in her book, which is that feminism, it was basically a rejection of patriarchal structures and had its roots in witchcraft and, you know, those sorts of things, and the occult. Whereas Dr. Danny Sulikowski has a theory that it's actually biologically evolutionary psychology, that's the basis, something a bit more primal, you might say. But anyway, let's get into it, and we'll see what we can make of it. Not a great freeze frame, but, you know, what can you do?
The more that I thought about it and read into it and looked into it, the less I think that intersexual competitive motives have hijacked feminism. And the more I think is that feminism was always actually just intersexual competition. I don't actually think it's ever been anything else.
To me, it just looks like something, not something that women wanted to do to each other, but out of that resentment.
So what feminism is doing is not making women hate all men. It's making women despise the men that they actually should be attracted to.
My resistance to the theory is that removal of agency. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Danny Sulikowski. She's an evolutionary psychologist from Australia. She's a senior lecturer at the Charles Sturt University. I'm so excited to have her on today. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So your work is just so fascinating.
So here in Australia, okay, so she's a senior lecturer. I went to uni about 15 years ago, and or maybe a little bit less. And one of my lecturers told me that professors, I think we do have professors in Australia, but they're a little different from the American system. I think a professorship here is kind of not so much around teaching, but you get to do your research. I could be making this up. Someone correct me in the comments if you know anything about it. But anyway, she's a senior lecturer, which means that she's, you know, pretty high up there at the university.
How you're talking about women's subtle ways of competing with each other, the mechanisms, the female aggression, all of that. What really caught my attention, what I wanted to talk to you about today, is how this relates to feminism and your thesis on how feminism is a sort of covert way women compete with each other to suppress reproduction. So that's really what I wanted to hone in on today. Should we jump right in there and have you explain to us what you mean? What are these hidden mechanisms?
Okay, so in order for this to sort of all make sense, the key bits to understand is that when women are competing with their rivals, the currency of competition is reproductive success. So when we're talking about women sabotaging other women, we're talking about them doing things that ultimately will have the effect of lowering their rivals' reproductive success.
So this is where I've got some issue. It's a very, I would call it a reductionist take. I don't know what she's a lecturer in, or a doctor, so obviously a PhD. But it's going to take the angle, something like Richard Dawkins kind of promotes, is the idea that essentially humans, all organisms, are a medium by which genes replicate themselves, and that the subtle changes from generation to generation increase over time to produce like species. So it's kind of reducing human interactions to effectively a biological thing. But I just thought, I don't necessarily buy all that, but I just thought it's an interesting take on feminism, and it may have something to do with it.
And so when we look at then sort of applying that really simple premise to feminism, and we have a look at what feminism's impact across society have been, and we can talk about the big impacts, which, you know, we've sort of seen. Obviously there was universal female suffrage, and we've seen tremendous increases in female participation in the workforce, and we've seen decline in marriage, and we've seen, as a result of all of those things, we've seen sort of downstream birth rate decline. So it's those big things that are sort of typically associated with feminism.
I think birth rate decline is one of the biggest topics not being spoken about enough in the world. It's like literally the projections are a fucking disaster worldwide in countries that you want to have a society like a pyramid where there's a few older people and a lot more younger people, because the younger people have got to take care of the older people. They've got to provide the taxes. They've got to provide all and do the work. I think Japan's facing a situation, or Korea, maybe both, are facing a situation before long, in a couple of generations, they're going to have an inverted triangle. They're going to have way more, for example, adult diapers outsell infant diapers. So they're going to have a real problem.
But it's also so many of the little things. So feminism has also attacked all of the sort of visible physical signals of female mate value that women would typically use to intimidate same-sex rivals and attract members of the opposite sex. So feminism has sort of demonized the idea that women should look attractive, and that looking attractive and being attractive is something that women should aspire to. That's very much been demonized by feminism.
So it's a two-pronged approach she's going at. One is demonize attractive, competent men, you know, strong, independent, maybe a bit aggressive, competitive, you know, demonize those men, and also demonize female beauty. So they come up with the bullshit. They used to blame men for that. They said the male gaze, you know, this idea that the media and society sort of objectified women by having these so-called beauty standards. But I think what OF has done by allowing women to do their own thing outside of, some women, outside of the restraints of having a manager or having a studio, and, you know, in terms of sexual content, they objectify themselves. And, you know, like I've seen people blame the OF industry and the corn industry on men because men keep watching it. And I've often argued we could shut down the corn industry tomorrow if women stop making it. So, so what she's saying here is that the feminists, first of all, they demonize traditionally attractive men and the qualities that comprise that, or that's comprised of, and they demonize women who want to be attractive to men. And hence, I suppose, the meme of the ugly feminist, overweight with blue hair and a septum ring. Everything, and the facial tattoos or whatever, everything except, as a woman, you should be everything except what's attractive to a man, because I don't need no man. Hey, Panchuchin, good to see you, mate. I think she's speaking about biological imperative and not addressing social and cultural factors. I agree it's reductive. Yeah, she is. She's kind of saying that when you're talking about she said the currency is reproductive success. I guess to a degree it is. We can't deny there's a biological aspect, a very strong one, towards sexual attraction and reproduction. But yes, she is being reductionist. Her argument is going to break down to basically it's the genes, right? And I don't mean the one that Sydney Sweeney wore. I mean, GENES. Although, some tight jeans can sometimes work. Who knows?
We've seen it go much further than simply demonizing being attractive. We've actually seen feminism, especially sort of more recently, actually celebrating being unattractive. So you think about the body positivity movement, it didn't take very long to morph from some sort of appreciation of healthy bodies into a really unholy celebration of morbidly obese and extraordinarily unhealthy bodies. Going back a little.
Interesting turn of phrase, an unholy celebration. I like it. I like this one.
A bit prior to then, we've seen previous valorization of hyper skinny bodies and hyper muscular bodies in women as well, which are also a part of the same mechanism. So I was initially, when I first started sort of looking into feminism as a vehicle for intra-sexual competition between women, that's sort of what I thought it was, a vehicle that had been hijacked or co-opted, if you like, whose original intention had been women's rights and women's social progress as it claims. And it has been hijacked, because I think it is a fair comment to suggest that most every female-female interaction has sort of intrasexual competition has like an organizing principle. So if you've got this sort of institution, this social institution of feminism that's dominated by women, we should expect to see it getting infected by female intrasexual competitive motives a lot. But the more that I sort of thought about it and
I reviewed a video the other day. I forget the woman's name. Damn. I think it was Helen. Can't remember her surname. Well, it wasn't the other day. It was the other week. What she called the great feminization of the institutions. And she's making a similar point here that when women dominate any organization, if we accept the fact that there are psychological differences between men and women, which there are, it changes the culture. And so I guess she's saying here that with the rise of feminism throughout the culture, we're getting a real shift, but it's been distorted into this idea of, rejecting competent men and rejecting the idea that women might want to look beautiful and sexy and stuff,
into it and looked into it, the less I think that intrasexual competitive motives have hijacked feminism, and the more I think is that feminism was always actually just intersexual competition. I don't actually think it's ever been anything else. I think it's always just been rival sabotage under the guise of whatever was a socially acceptable story to tell at the time.
Okay, what led you to believe that?
I think the main thing that led me to believe it is that if you suggest that there was a time when feminism got co-opted by intrasexual competition motives, then you need to be able to say, when did that happen? And so you go back in time and you look for the points in time where feminism was not obsessed with separating women from motherhood. And actually you can't find that time period. So you can't.
Yeah, I believe the early feminists, even the earliest, even the likes of Simone de Beauvoir, if I'm correct, I think even Simone de Beauvoir probably considered the original feminist author. There's some argument about Mary Wollstonecraft might have been a proto sort of feminist. There's discussions all the way through really feminism against motherhood, right? Like the idea that you shouldn't be a mother, so you shouldn't have children. It's a very individualistic view. Now she's making the argument that's due to intrasexual competition. She'll expand on that and sort of get into some more nuances and a few more subtleties about it. But that's the basis of it.
Find a period in feminism's sort of existence where it was concerned with the things that individual women were concerned with in the main, which was primarily being excellent mothers and, excellent homemakers and, playing that social role really well is actually what concerned the majority of women. And it was never something that concerned feminism. So that's sort of the first sort of stumbling block, I guess, to suggesting that feminism has been co-opted. You need to find the time and place where that happened, and I actually don't think I can find that time and place. I can't go back far enough in time to find that. The other sort of observation that convinces me along those lines as well is having a look at how in sort of when Rome's birth rates declined as well, and having a look at what was a lot of the social the social discourse that was happening in the time that was surrounding Rome's birth rates. And even though they didn't call it feminism, it was all of the same rhetoric that we're seeing now. So women were demonizing men, they were demonizing marriage, they were suggesting that motherhood was a sort of prison. They introduced Rome's version of a baby bonus.
I was muted. I've never heard that before. That to me is fucking interesting. The idea that a similar phenomenon, cultural trend, happened in Rome. I have heard some arguments made. I forget who made them, that you could track the downfall of civilizations in some instances around the prevalence of female promiscuity. So whether or not that also means male promiscuity, it probably does. But I didn't know that Rome had a similar problem with this rejection of what you might call a traditional role for women. And I'm surprised to hear that, because the likes of Jordan Peterson have sort of said this is the first time ever, I guess because of hormonal birth control, the first time ever that women have been able to participate in the way they do in politics, in the workplace, etc., etc. So the Romans had this cultural shift, but they still wouldn't have had the contraception, the technology, to actually make it possible. But I thought that was interesting about Rome. Ree, I didn't see your comment, so it must have been, you must have said something naughty. What you doing over there, mate? Saying naughty stuff in the chat. But going good, mate, going good.
To try and incentivize women to get married and have children. And to the extent that incentive worked, all it did is that women got married, got children, got the money, and then deserted the husband, and in some cases both the husband and the child taking the incentive. And so what we're sort of calling feminism, and what we tend to think of as being sort of something that is unique to this particular time and place, I don't think a lot of the rhetoric around feminism is unique to our time and place actually at all. And I don't think that it's, if it's consistent across different cultures and different societies, then it requires an explanation that's not culturally specific. And intrasexual competition provides that explanation.
I thought, let me have your thoughts on this. Because if you go back to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, when this first appears as we know it in the 19th century, what is so clear from her writing is that resentment towards men. And so when I look at your theory, my first thought is this looks like born out of that resentment and that hatred, that jealousy and envy towards men, and then seeing them as the oppressor. And then when it happens that we feel oppressed and that someone has power over us, what we want to do psychologically is to become them. And so that's what women did. They then tried to become like men. So to me, it just looks like not something that women wanted to do to each other, but out of that resentment, much like I think it's so similar to communism in that way. They harness that resentment and jealousy and envy in humans. So, and I think there are other parallels as well with feminism and Marxism. How does that fit into what you're saying?
I won't freeze it there. Okay, that's better. Panchuchin, yeah, intra-sexual competition. The argument she's making, competing for the best available mate, and antenatal. She'll get into some subtleties about that. What she's going to, she'll hit a couple of topics. One is going to be the idea that, in terms of reproduction, reproductive success happens against a backdrop of the reproductive success around you. So basically, as long as you're having more kids than the ones around you, then there's a higher chance that your genes, this is the biology or the evolutionary theory, that there's like a social aspect to it. It's not just you, the woman, passing on genes. It's the proportion compared to the backdrop of those around you. And then she'll also get onto virtue signaling, which, so, you know, you might say one thing but do something else. It's quite an interesting take. I was previously saying, if no one ever demonized you, you must have been beaten with the snaggle face stick. If no one ever demonized you, you must have been beaten with the snaggle face stick. I think that makes sense. I think I get it.
I completely agree with the parallels between feminism and Marxism. I don't think they're that different, I'll be honest. So I completely agree with you there. And I also agree with you. I'm not sure if you said harness is what you said, that feminism harnesses that envy. And I think in some sense you're right. But the envy itself is not what drives the feminist propaganda or the feminist messaging. The women who are pushing that messaging are not themselves envious of men, but they know that they can convince other women to become envious of men instead of sort of, you know, adoring of men, how they ought to be. They can convince them to become envious of men, and then to, you know, everything that follows from that. And we see exactly the same demonization of men now. It's not something that only happened 100 years ago. We're seeing it now, and we're seeing it continue. And so we get a chance, because we can sort of, we're living it in real time. And so we get a really good chance to interrogate what it actually is about men that's being demonized. And what's being demonized are all of the traits that make men excellent fathers, excellent husbands, and excellent providers, right? Those masculine, strong, competent traits is what gets demonized. So what feminism is doing is not making women hate all men. It's making women despise the men that they actually should be attracted to. So it's skewing female mate preferences, and it's skewing female judgments of the mate value of prospective men, such that instead of being turned on by, you know, men who are excellent husband and father material, they're highly suspicious of such men.
Have you ever watched a video like one of these in real life interview things? I sometimes review them. Caitlin Bennett, Savannah Craven, so that's Liberty Hangout and her Patriot Voice. And you can see, and others, but you can see when a feminist, blue-haired feminist is there and has what looks like a boyfriend, and he's like a male feminist. That's the kind of men that she's saying that women are being encouraged to be attracted to. And I don't think they're attractive to anybody, to tell you the truth. And you can even see in the dynamic where she'll be quite masculine and he sort of does what he says, and, you know, I'm a bad man. It's the most bizarre thing to watch.
And at the same time, they've been made to be highly suspicious of the entire institution of marriage and motherhood as well. So even though, yes, there is absolutely this deep-seated resentment for men that weaves its way all throughout feminism, which we're seeing reach like a special crescendo now, in the here and now. I think that the targeting of men is less about targeting of men specifically and more about demonizing excellent husbands and fathers, and thus compelling women to make terrible mate choices, which women frequently do.
Based.
Right. And then that also leads them to, you know, it's not like feminists are having a lot of kids either. So it's like a suicide bomb.
Yes and no. So
Panchuchin, this will address your point, I think, because it does look like a contradiction, saying competing for the best male or the best mate, but also antenatal. That doesn't make sense. It's contradictory, but I think that's where the host has brought up this question. Is it like, you know, they'll talk about GAD-SAD and suicidal empathy. She's going to get into some of the nuances of her theory here.
So I'm sure you will have heard, and I'm sure your listeners will have heard as well, of GAD-SAD's
there we go.
Theory of suicidal empathy. So you know, he sort of has this idea that empathy has become, and I haven't read his book that's just come out. I will concede that I haven't read it yet, so I'm only going to offer the kind of overview of his theory that he has given himself in hundreds of Twitter posts and interviews. I'm not commenting on the book directly, but he sort of, you know, has this theory that empathy has sort of gone into, like, become hyperactive, right? And that it's causing this notion of people to have empathy towards others that, you know, are going to hurt you, you know, the people that you can't trust and the people that you shouldn't have empathy for. And so his argument is that it sort of represents this excessive hyperactive empathy. It's basically a bug and not a feature. My argument about the kinds of events that he frames as suicidal empathy is that it's not suicidal empathy at all. What it is homicidal virtue signaling. So the people who are engaging in what potentially looks like suicidal empathy, especially if it goes wrong, are taking a calculated risk. And what they're doing is virtue signaling behaviors that are incredibly dangerous, potentially more dangerous for other people than for them. And that's part of the calculated risk, in order to set these behaviors as some sort of a social standard, as some sort of a thing that's expected, in the hope that other people for whom these behaviors represent even a greater danger will then actually engage in them and be harmed by them. So there was an excellent example that I just actually saw just this evening. This will come back to your question. I'm working my way back around, I promise. There was an excellent example that I saw this evening where there was a man who was murdered in the US in the subway. He was pushed down the stairs by another man who was just psychotic by all accounts. The man that pushed him down the stairs in the subway and killed him had only months earlier, maybe even weeks earlier, very recently done a similar thing to a woman who had survived, but she refused to cooperate with the police and the prosecutors because she didn't want to be responsible for putting another black man in prison. And
that's crazy. I reckon that's probably one of the most succinct examples you could ever have from real life about what's wrong with being over empathetic. Again, something Jordan Peterson, sorry, my hat's sideways, so tilted. Something Jordan Peterson talks about is the idea that the general female approach to relationships, whether it's children, partners, friends, whatever, and male approaches to them, is that the female approach inherently is great when it comes to raising kids, especially when they're young. They're very protective, they're very empathetic, they're very sympathetic to the needs of others. They're very cautious about predators, things like this. That's great within a family environment, but it doesn't scale well. If you scale that up to, you know, through the institutions, through education, through business, politics, you end up with the mess that we have at the moment, like the kind of mess they're experiencing in particularly in Europe, Ireland, England, France, all the racial issues there, because they're so empathetic that they don't want to assume that maybe their culture might be better than some other culture. All cultures are equal, you know, that kind of empathy, that unlimited tolerance. Yes, unless the woman pushed was white, the empathy, etc. She probably was. Yeah, I'd imagine. I see what you're saying. If she was black, then it would have been tribalism. A lot of what we were seeing going on with the Carmelo Anthony and what's his name, Austin. A lot of that going on there. They had to reject 3 of the. They had an argument that the complaint there were no black jurists on the case in the court. Well, someone said it was an all-white jury, first of all, which it wasn't. There were other minorities. There were Hispanics and I think some Indians or Muslims there. But they said, these last 3, they had 600 candidates for the jury. The last 3 were black women who were rejected, but they had all stated they couldn't put a black man in jail or they couldn't find him guilty because he was black. So that's why they had the vetting process in the first place. And if you saw the narrative, especially being pushed by the Anthony family, they went straight for the race card right from the beginning. They hired that bloke. I forget his name. He's some kind of activist known as a race hustler. And so I don't think I'm pretty sure she probably was white. It seems that white females seem to be pretty dominant in this type of phenomenon because they're also told they're privileged, right? So they can't be privileged, and they have to look down at other races as though they're inferior. That's the thing about it. It's actually a kind of it's almost. I've heard people argue that intersectionality is almost like a white supremacist movement. It's saying that white people are so good and minorities are so kind of inferior that we have to give them a leg up. We have to stuff like this. It's an interesting take. It was a bit hyperbolic, but it was interesting nonetheless.
So a few weeks later, someone else gets harmed. Someone else gets, in fact, much worse harmed than her. And they were talking about that as an example of her suicidal empathy. But it wasn't her suicidal empathy. It was homicidal empathy, because it wasn't her that ended up getting hurt by this man. It was someone else. And exactly the same thing is happening with all of this feminist stuff. So the women who are responsible for driving these ideologies and pushing these sort of cultural norms that are really, really hostile to reproductive success, yes, they're driving down everyone's reproductive success. And that's why we are seeing birth rates like just continuing to sink and sink. However, it's not suicidal, it's homicidal, because what happens is that the currency of evolution is reproductive success, but it's not absolute reproductive success, it's relative reproductive success. Provided that you are having more offspring than the background rate of offspring per woman in the population, you will continue to win the evolutionary game. So if you drive the population background rate down, you don't need to have as many children to win the evolutionary game. Now, what will happen at the level of the population is the population will collapse. The society will collapse if birth rates plummet. However, evolution doesn't care about whether or not societies collapse. It cares about whether or not your genes propagate. When societies collapse, rarely are they just left to their own devices to peacefully collapse and die. They get overtaken and they get invaded. Now, what happens when weak, collapsing societies get invaded? The men get killed. The women do not. The women go on to become a part, whether they want to or not, the women go on to become a part of the founder population of whatever rises from the ashes of the collapsed society, plus whoever comes in to raid it.
Yeah, that's like the war brides theory. I've seen Rollo Tomasi talk about this. Again, it's going back to Evo Psych. Some people have called evolutionary psychology astrology for blokes. I'm not refuting that there's nothing in it, but sometimes people try to use these theories as a like a panacea or an answer for everything. And also the language slips in, like I mentioned Richard Dawkins before, where the genes almost seem to be endowed with some kind of goal, right? I don't think it's a teleological perspective as such. Like the idea that evolution is actually working towards progress, because we sometimes use the word evolution to mean, we need to evolve personally. As a person, we need to evolve, which kind of means grow, become better. Evolution, by the theory of it, is not really working towards improving anything. It's just the fact that things that work and they stick, and things that don't work don't stick. And the result is what it is. It's not, the genes themselves aren't, even the idea of natural selection as a term, it's not really selection, because that introduces the idea of agency, that someone is selecting. By evolutionary theory, there's no agency. In fact, that the initial premise is that there's random processes. There's no intention behind them, but the language always ends up being that the genes are trying to survive, right? And therefore, she's making the claim here that inherently means that women ultimately, at the extreme end, will even make choices without knowing it that will bring society down, be invaded by other societies, because they still get to reproduce, because it's the men who get killed and the women get co-opted into the new society. It used to be as slaves, or it used to be as, as concubines, something like that. In the modern era, I got no idea what that looks like. Are they saying that our ontology changes through adaptation? No, I don't think she's not explicitly talking about ontology, but people who discuss evolution often, they almost basically can't avoid the ontological language. That what she's saying is, or what you can infer from what she's saying is that adaptation has some kind of ontology behind it. That's, I think, more what she's saying. I don't know that she would agree that we have ontology, but her language, the idea that the genes are trying to reproduce, or the genes are, driving us, that's where it loses me. But I still think it's an interesting take, and she's got some interesting things to say.
Invade it, to take it over. And so what you end up with is the women who are driving these birth limiting ideologies, but still were, still reproduced enough that their lineages were there at the end. It's those lineages that become the founding women of the next population, which means the genes that promote this behavior proliferate throughout the growing civilization, just waiting for the circumstances to be right for these types of ideologies to re-emerge, and for female intersexual competition to reach a crescendo, for birth rates to decline.
Yeah, so right there, she's talking about the genes that promote, and the genes are waiting for the right circumstances. So she's pretty much putting agency onto the genes, right? My understanding, I've got a very, very rudimentary understanding of evolution. I've read most of Darwin's book, Evolution by Natural, on the Origin of Species. I know that's developed a lot over the years. People have argued that he was wrong about certain things. There's a whole, swathe of literature about it. But the core premise is still the same, which is the idea that it's random processes, and through slight variations make different things work. And when life is on a knife edge, which it has been for through all of, almost all of the history of the world, life's on a knife edge. You're fighting for survival every day. If a gazelle can run that much faster than its buddy, it's got a higher chance of reproducing, because it won't get eaten. And then so the ones that can run a little faster reproduce more than the ones who can't run faster, and so you have faster gazelles. And then the same thing happens with the lions. The ones who can run faster, a little bit faster than their buddy, get to eat, and the ones who don't. So then whatever works sticks. and whatever doesn't. But she's still using this language of agency. So it bugs me in the sense that it reduces us to, like I said before, just being a host to these genes, which are actually driving us. But by the theory, there is no drive, there's no plan, there's no agency. So it reduces everything that we are to nothing, right? Right. So that's where I kind of take a issue with it. Well, I guess that means I take issue with all of it.
And the whole process to happen again. So it's cyclical. It's not suicidal. Genetically, it's homicidal. It's these lineages driving this process and wiping out all of the competing lineages, but the ones that win were the ones responsible for driving it in the first place. So it just keeps happening.
I understand. Yeah, it's very compelling. How does it explain mothers' behaviors to their sons? Because evolutionarily, I am far from an evolutionary biologist, so please correct me, but I've understood that male offspring, they produce more offspring than female offspring. So why then are we seeing that mothers, feminist mothers, are sabotaging their sons? They're basically neutralizing them, pathologizing them.
Okay, so yes, a couple of big questions in there. So firstly, men can't have, like sons can't have more offspring than daughters. So an individual son has a larger reproductive potentially very few men, have anything, end up fathering as many children as they theoretically could. So obviously, yes, that is true. However, you have to remember, of course, that every single offspring that is born has a mother and a father. So men and women as groups have exactly equal.
I had to stop and think about that. That was kind of interesting. I thought, because I guess we come from the approach that because women go through a period of gestation when they're pregnant, etc., so they can only have one baby at a time, whereas guys can impregnate as many women as he has the energy and the internal resources to impregnate. So that's talking about the potential. But when she said every child has a mother and a father, biologically at least, I thought that's interesting. But I think it's around the other way. I heard somewhere that if you look at anyone's ancestry, we all have twice as many females in our ancestry as we do males. I forget the reasoning for that. I think it was something to do with, so say for example, the host was saying men can have more children. First of all, there's that fact that you still need a father and a mother. So there's always going to be men and women as groups are going to have an equal number of children. But I think given that, what do they say, that, men control access to relationships, this is a red pill thing, and women control access to sex, a lot of men can't have children. That because they can't get a woman, right? Or they can't get a woman to agree to have a child with them. So that would mean, I think, that men in individuals, I'd say there are more individual men who don't have children than there are individual women. But the aggregate of it all is that because every child has a mother and a father, men and women have the same number of children. I had to think that through for a bit.
Productive success, exactly equal, because they share a 50% share in every single offspring that the population produces. So therefore, mothers of sons and mothers of daughters do not a priori necessarily have an advantage over each other in terms of whether or not their son or their daughter is going to be a better reproducer. As you start to get into different quality of offspring, then you start to see some skew. So because male reproductive success is more skewed than female reproductive success, so you end up with, it's not a huge difference to by the way. It's not anywhere near as big as a difference as it is in other species that don't have a sort of social monogamous sort of issues-like system. We're not monogamous, but we like to pretend we are. And that constrains a lot of what happens. The fact that we at least have to pretend that we are. But male reproductive success is definitely more skewed. Female reproductive success is more evenly spread over the population. So if you are a...
Right, that's what I was saying. So certain, most women have children, put it that way. Almost, well, it used to be almost all of them, but not all men have children. I think that's where the skew she's talking about. She said it wasn't huge.
Really high mate value individual, then yes, you may be better off with a son long term, because he too will be high mate value, and so might be lucky enough to be at that end where the skew is going to benefit him, and therefore he might have more offspring than a daughter with a similar mate value, just because female success is less skewed. And then obviously for exactly the same reasons, but in reverse, if you're very low mate value, you might be better off having a daughter for reproductive success. So there are potentially differences between sons and daughters in terms of the reproductive success they can provide, but on average it has to be, by definition, has to be identical. But they could be skewed as a function of other factors. But as to the question of why are mothers of their sons doing this, and I think this comes down to the notion of social signaling. So with what I was sort of saying before about the idea of this suicidal empathy actually being like, it's not suicidal, it's homicidal, right? The idea is you engage in this virtue signaling, which is a term that I used to hate, and it desperately annoys me that I now feel like I have no choice but to use it. You engage in this virtue signaling, but it's not about how people see you. I think that's the mistake that people make when they think about virtue signaling. That virtue signaling is just showing off. It's not. The function of virtue signaling as a social signal is to manipulate the behavior of others. So what you're trying to do is engage in certain behaviors for show. So you engage in these behaviors in a very exaggerated way, and in a time and place where there is an audience. So, social media makes like a perfect place for this type of social manipulative signaling to happen, because it's done in front of an audience, but it can also be curated. It doesn't have to actually be what it looks like, right? But they engage in this social signaling, whether that's treating their children a certain way, whether...
Yeah, the virtue signaling in social media is interesting because you're removed from the consequences, right? You can say things, and you can put a black square in your profile pic and things like that on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, and you can present yourself as having a certain opinion and promoting a certain opinion and perspective, but your audience don't know what your real life is, right? So that's interesting. Social media allows virtue signaling to sort of run rampant.
It's emasculating their sons, whatever it might be. And the sort of function of that behavior is to attempt to influence other people to do the same thing. But if you're trying to do it in a superficial way and only doing it when people see, but your goal is to make people think that this is what you do all the time, and thus that this is what they should do all the time. So the idea is to try and, yes, you might bear some cost of doing this to your own children, but your hope is that you will influence other people to think that, this is an excellent role model, something that they should follow, especially if it's the kind of thing that comes with a tremendous amount of kudos. So much virtue signaling does come with a tremendous amount of social kudos. So think about, the women who are transing their kids. Think about the social kudos that comes with that. And of course, the reason why it comes with such social kudos is because it is so costly. Other people are celebrating mums transing their kids, not because you're so brave and something else. No, they're celebrating it because you are destroying your own future reproductive potential of your children.
Whoa, that's wild. First of all, this is really the reason why I decided to review this video. I cannot believe that an Australian senior lecturer at a university can speak so openly and negatively about certain aspects of human behavior, especially the trans issue, and not be like just hounded and run out of town. I find that to be incredible, and I really respect the fact that she just speaks so matter of factly about it. You know, these things that are, oh no, you can't say this, you can't say that, and she just says them as though they're common sense, which, by the way, they are. But the idea that she's well, first of all, she was talking about the fact, like I said before, talking about the fact that genes almost seem to have this agency and this ontology, and humans are just like a host for the expression of the genes. But now she's talking about the motivations of the women. She's using that same language as though they kind of know what they're doing. She'll say they don't. It's not conscious, but kind of the language slips away from the genes are driving it to it's not premeditated, but almost a conscious decision made by women. I know she's not saying that, but that's how the language tends to, well, it falls into that pattern.
And that's something that your rivals are celebrating. They've got no idea that that's why they're celebrating it, but that's why they're celebrating it. And that's why these mothers are clapped and cheered. And yes, you go, girl. I mean, this is what it is. So it's that virtue signaling. And so what you're looking at when you're seeing women, you know, particularly when it's sort of wrapped around, you know, feminist virtue signaling, and which can get really awful when it's turned towards children in a whole bunch of ways. I've known women who make a point or who claim, critical, may not be true, right? This is signaling, right? It's not honest. You can't assume it's honest. Women who claim to have made a point to have never told their daughters they were pretty, because I don't want their daughters to think that that's important. It's just mental, right? But what they're doing is trying to, so, you know, they may say they never do that, but they may do it all the time. What they're hoping is that other women will hear them, other women who look up to them, who see, you know, their.
That's that old sort of joke about, you know, women, if they encourage their friends to get like ugly haircuts, or if they're looking at a dress and go, what do you think, girls? And they go, yeah, that looks great on you, when it doesn't, right? Because they're trying to sabotage their competition. But to do it, like she said with the trans issue, to say that women are encouraging other women to trans their kids because it's going to, that's brutal. That is absolutely brutal. Hey, Sniper, good to see you, man. Nice to have you on board. And Panchuchin, yes, I'm surprised she can say that in Australia. I really am. It blows me away that she's able to speak so freely. What interests me is the Evo Psych makes sense. It speaks to human nature while somehow avoiding ontology. The moment you ask them the nature and behavior of a chicken, they go to ontology. I was just thinking about that while we were watching this. It's the thing about when I've watched stuff on evolution, and Evo Psych is obviously based on evolution. Just the idea that psychology is and probably psychology is an outgrowth of biology. The assumption that the mind is what the brain does, so it's still based in physical, in matter. And therefore subject to evolution. I was thinking about the idea of inductive reasoning, that a lot of these kind of explanations seem to be inductive. They're looking at a phenomena, a set of phenomena, and trying to track backwards to understand what caused that phenomenon. So it's going from the top down. It's not far off. I don't want to be too disrespectful, but not far off from being an educated guess about what's going on. But in the end, you're still trying to find a starting point that's leading to this point. So you end up with some semblance of ontology, right? That it was meant to go this way. What made that happen to make that happen to make that happen to get it to this point? So it's inductive. You could apply some deductive reasoning in the sense if you say, like, if a theory can predict things, then you can probably be a bit more on the deductive side. Can evolution predict things? It can predict discoveries because the timelines are too long to actually see it. Some people argue if you watch bacteria or you watch insects with a short lifespan, you can see some evolution occurring. They reproduce very fast. They have a very short lifespan. So you can see multiple generations, iterations occur, and you can see the evolution taking place. There's no way to see it at what they might call a macro scale, because the timelines are too long. But you can make predictions like, if according to evolutionary theory, if we dig to a certain level, we should find bones of a certain type. Somebody once there was a famous quote that, evolution could be blown apart very simply. Just find a rabbit skeleton in the Cambrian layer of geology, right? Dig deep enough that you've gone back 100 million years and find a rabbit skeleton, evolution's fucked, right? So it's interesting. It's interesting, but yeah, it's inductive, and that's where it puts me a bit off. It's a kind of explaining, well, it is what it is because it is what it is, right? That's kind of how it comes across.
With a wonderful relationship with their daughter and see their daughter doing great things, may look up to them and think, oh, maybe that's where I'm going wrong. Maybe I'm emphasizing the wrong things and, making my daughter care about the wrong things. And then actually take that as, seriously good advice and decide that they're going to take that on board and do it. So when you're seeing this manipulative signaling, that's what it's about. So you're either seeing someone who is dishonestly signaling these behaviors and sort of winning the game. So, pretending to do these things. These are normally people with influence. They're normally people who have the capacity to show off in public to a large audience, and perhaps then have opportunities to undo that damage in private, if you like, or to behave quite differently in private to offset the damage. That's what you could be looking at. The other thing you could be looking at, of course, is the fruit of the labor of these women, which is the women who have been completely sucked in by the virtue signaling and the manipulative signaling and the kudos that goes with it and whatever, and is doing these things, actually causing genuine, real harm because they have been tricked. That they're playing the game, but they're not winning it, they're losing it. They are genuinely just harming their children because they have been successfully manipulated into doing that
so brutal
by other women. So it can be hard to know what you're looking at any given point in time. Is this someone who is just putting on a show, or is this someone who has actually taken these harmful messages on board and internalized them and is now sabotaging their own future offspring and their own future reproductive success?
Right. Okay. So, and that would explain why you have now a lot of women.
Hey, Mo, it's good to see you too, brother. Thanks for dropping in. Yeah, it must be about midnight or something over there. But now, have a good night's sleep, and yeah, thanks again for dropping by. God bless, mate.
Coming out and look what we're in there, they start to advocate against transing kids because they're sort of waking up to what they have done, and they went into it sort of subconsciously.
They went into it subconsciously, and I think it's also, given that we've touched on the specific issue of transing kids, I think it's probably also, sort of fair to point out that for many of the women who did that, yes, they were absolutely sucked into the ideology and pushed for it, and in many cases it was the mothers who were insistent, much more so often mothers than fathers. It's also fair to point out that in many cases the children themselves picked up the ideology, and mothers and fathers tried. Mothers, again, more often fathers, but very often also mothers, tried very hard to stop it, but between the school counsellors and the doctors and all the people insisting on them, they, may not have been happy about it or comfortable with it, but were effectively kind of dragged along.
I'm astounded how the schools get involved with the kids today. There's a couple of things, my stepdaughter. I mean, for all intents and purposes, she's my daughter. I normally just call her my daughter, but I have a daughter as well. So just to make the distinction, she's 18 now, but when she was 16, she'd go to the doctor and, you know, for whatever reason, and her mum would ring up to ask about, you know, the results, and they'd say, oh, we can't tell you. We have to speak to the child on her own, which I thought was bizarre. I thought, when the hell did that happen, that a doctor can't discuss a child's results with the parents? That just blew me away. And then the damn school system, we decided to take her out of school when she was about 16 or 17, and to homeschool her for the last bit, because the school was just insane, and it wasn't working. And she was getting text messages personally from the school counselors asking her to come in and sort of saying, look, just wait, just come in and speak to us. And I got Katie, my wife, to write to the school and say, hey, knock it off. Do not contact her directly. She's a minor. If you want, well, actually, just don't contact us. But if you have anything to say, then say it to me, the parent. I'm astounded at the way the primary schools, the high schools, you know, you have schools, I've heard in America, I'm sure it's here as well, hiding certain behaviors from the parents. Yeah, it happened so fast, and it was sane, and then it wasn't. I know. I think a friend of mine had a theory, Panchurch, and that we've had it so good for so long that we're kind of asleep. And we also treat g'day Mr. Ben Spastic. Why so serious? Because this is serious, man. So yeah, so I think he had a theory that Australia, and also we think our politicians are a joke. We have for like decades now. I think a lot of Australians just see it as a big joke, and we don't take them seriously, and we don't often pay attention properly to what kind of bills they're putting through. They'll do things like they'll bring in new family law bills at midnight on a Sunday or something, and it redefines the legal landscape for parental rights and divorce, and no one even knew about it. And then you have the media, which is we have a public broadcaster, the ABC. Yep. And they're supposed to be unbiased. They're funded billions. I think it's $1 billion a year or something or more by the government. They're supposed to be providing an unbiased and balanced media to the people. So often you'll find small country towns, we have a lot of those, that don't get coverage by mainstream media. Part of their charter is to have news of interest to those areas and to represent them. Sort of all the kind of places where media may not get to, the AB is supposed to get to, including the arts, They used to have a very, like a dialectical approach, which was, there was a conservative side of the ABC and there was a leftist side. And that's gone. There's almost no conservatives left in the ABC. They've been completely overtaken by the left. Need the emu wars to need the emu wars again. This is weird. It won't let me change backgrounds. Oh, there we go. Oh, I can't remove that from the stage without messing it all up. Anyway, that's a picture I've got of the emu wars. Anyway, feminism stole Australia. That's what happened. Yeah, Ben, if you've watched anything of Bettina Arndt, she's a fucking trooper, absolute trooper. The old girl. She fights for men's rights, and it started with empathy, yeah. Oh, with apathy, yes, yeah. Like I said, we had it too good. We had it too good for too long. and we just didn't take it seriously. I mean, what our current government is doing. I mean, fucking hell, here in Victoria, for example, we had the machete ban. We had a bit of a problem with youngsters running around with machetes. So the state government, in its fucking wisdom, spent $13 million to put out 30 or 40 bins where an amnesty for 3 months where people could hand in their machetes without no questions asked, and they ban machetes. I got a mate works in a mower shop. He held up a ride-on mower blade. It's about that long. Held it in one hand and he said, "I'm allowed to own this, but not allowed to own a machete." So hunters and people who actually go bush and use them as a tool aren't allowed to use them. And guess what's happening all around Victoria now? We have a machete problem. Just the other night, on Saturday night, I think it was, a bunch of kids had a machete fight on Flinders Street Station. The major Flinders Street or Spencer Street? Southern Cross, one of the two, one of the major train stations here in Victoria. Absolutely ridiculous. After the Bondi incident, the federal government thought, well, the best thing to do is we're going to restrict gun laws even more. It's insane. Yeah, Victoria is. I'm still a proud Victorian. I grew up here. I wasn't born here. I was born in Northern Ireland, but I've since I was 5 years old, 4 or 5, I've grown up in Victoria. I did travel around the country for about a year or so, visited all the states and saw all the things, and effectively I did a lap and ended up back in Victoria. And I live near the border. I work in New South Wales. And my girlfriend at the time wanted to live in New South Wales, and I said, "Fuck no, I'm living in Victoria." I don't know why I call it sentimental, but sentimental, sense of belonging. But politically, yes, we're fucked. Yeah, politically. And the sooner, well, anyway, let's just hope that Pauline Hanson continues on that rocket. I saw Barnaby Joyce being asked about the recent polls that has Pauline as the preferred prime minister, even though she hasn't got a party anywhere near big enough to form a government at this stage. But Barnaby, I like him. He said, "Look, we don't want to have hubris. Polls are polls. The election will look different, in 18 months or whatever it is. It'll look different from the polls. As they say, the only poll that matters is the one on election day." But it is quite an astounding thing to see Pauline Hanson on the rise. All right, I've got to go off camera for a bit. I'll be listening.
I don't want to. I just want to make sure that I don't sort of tar all parents of trans kids with the same
absolutely
brush.
not. Absolutely not. Which is why the social contagion, is so important to talk about. And so that's how I thought about feminism, and it was more like a psychological virus. That started with resentment towards men, and that they're infecting each other with, much like that. And then you have that experiment 1954 with the mouse, Milner at McGill, where the mouse they stimulate the reward center, although that wasn't originally what they wanted to do, but they stimulated the reward center. Then effectively the mouse kills himself because he keeps wanting that center stimulated. When we give women that grievance, that resentment towards men, it makes them feel good. So that's why I wanted to bring in that experiment with the mouse. It makes us feel morally superior for a moment. And you see it when you look at reels. Women post on TikTok and they're talking about everything from mental load. They're talking about how they divorced their husbands, and yes, they also get applause from it, but there is that pleasure they get from feeling momentarily superior in that grievance. And I just always thought of feminism as that women keep pushing that button to feel good in the moment, even though it leads to them not having reproductive success. And that's sort of as a psychological virus. What do you think of that?
I don't think that's a bad framing at all. I think that moral superiority, that, you made the connection before between feminism and like Marxism, socialism, like communism, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's that same moral superiority that is what leads, and we're seeing it now. We're seeing it now in Australia. We're seeing it in the US and certainly in the UK. This desire of the radical left, which is the radical left is not in government at the moment in the US, not at the federal level, but obviously different states.
It's institutional.
Well, exactly. That's right. Not in the White House at this particular point in time, but that's less relevant to what's going on because, as you say, it's through the institutions. It's baked in.
Mental health. Yeah.
Mental health, universities, actual health, hospitals, schools, education. It's everywhere, right? Journalism. So, and it's the same in Australia and it's the same in the UK. And what you're seeing is the moral superiority of that radical left. Once you've got that, that can be used to justify anything. So if you believe that what you're doing is either makes you morally superior by definition, then there is nothing you can't do because everything you do by definition is ultimately morally justified because you are morally superior. And if it's something that you want to do and something you enjoy doing, then you either have to admit that you're an evil, horrible person, or you just go along with this notion of moral superiority. And so I think that sort of particular psychological mechanism that feminism has hijacked on, I think that's the same mechanism that all the broader radical left agenda, which obviously centers around feminism anyways.
Muted. I think something they were saying there was really important was this demonization of your ideological opponents. And that's really, really bad. That's where this moral high ground they take, they no longer engage in argument or discussion. What they do is they say, we're morally correct and you're evil. And she's right, you can justify anything. So that's why if you call somebody a Nazi, a whole group of people, well, what wouldn't you do to defend against that? Right. So that's that demonization, calling Trump a fascist. And, what wouldn't you do if you really believed that Trump was a fascist and you really wanted to do something good? Like if you were asked if you could go back to, 1938, 1937 in Germany and had an opportunity to take out, the moustache man, would you do it? A lot of people would say, shit, yeah, of course I would. So if you're putting Trump in the same level, the same league, completely rational for someone young and stupid to think they're doing God's work by taking him out. So that demonization, I remember a politician here talking in Australia. He said, I was listening to it probably in the early 80s, and he was talking about probably the 60s, maybe the 70s, before the 70s, maybe. After an election, when the one party wins and they claim they claim success and the other party graciously concedes defeat, there would be a ball. The politicians from both sides would go to a ball with their wives, and they'd have a few drinks and they'd dance and they'd, go, okay, we'll get you next time, right? Like a sporting event, the teams are brutal on the field, or a boxing match, or MMA where the guys are trying to kill each other, metaphorically, and then they're hugging afterwards, right? Good sportsmanship. Politics now has become this good versus evil, and it's a terrible way to view it.
It's not like these are two separate independent things, right? It centers around feminism anyway. And, I sort of like to call it the omni-cause. Again, that's not my word. But I think it's a good word because I think it captures the way that these different radical left-wing causes just kind of meld into one, even when they're ideologically completely incompatible.
This bit coming up, I've listened to about half of this interview, so we're coming up to the bit I haven't listened to before, so that'll be a cold reaction. But she answered a question here that I thought was quite interesting, that people will support contradictory ideologies as long as they're not the status quo. An example would be Gays for Palestine, right? I've seen them holding up pride flags in the name of Palestine. She's got a pretty hot take on this, right? And Jordan Peterson often said, how do postmodernists get into bed with Marxists? postmodernists are supposed to not believe in any grand narrative, and Marxism is the ultimate, or a grand narrative. So it's strange bedfellows, but she'll give an explanation here.
Like if we think about Greta Thunberg's, she started off being like the climate crusader or whatever, right?
Or as we call her here in Australia, the doom goblin. I'm not kidding. We have a right-wing news outlet online called Sky News. And whenever they talk about Greta Thunberg, they talk about the doom goblin. It's fucking hilarious.
Now she stands up and wears a, keffiyeh around her neck and screams about free Palestine. And, I'm not sure whether it's occurred to her, but I'm pretty confident that if we were to free Palestine and give them their own state, I'm going to guess that climate change is not going to be like high on their, policy agenda. I don't think they're going to give a shit, personally. Very similar story in a...
I love that. That's Aussie talk there. I don't think they're going to give a shit. She said it in a whisper as though that makes a difference. As though she's not broadcasting on the fucking internet. That's Aussie. That's Aussie stuff right there. This chick is so based. And as I think it was Panchuchin was saying before, and so was I, unbelievable that she can speak so freely without being harassed and run out of town. Cognitive dissonance, we hold contradictory views often. It's true, but the question could be why. And she's going to, why do lefties, it doesn't matter what the issue is, as long as they have an issue, right? That's kind of what she's getting at. Whether it's pride, whether it's Palestine, whether it's racial, it doesn't matter. And some of the things I've reviewed, I sometimes have these fun reviews where again, it's normally Caitlin Bennett going out to these protesters, and they're fucking hilarious. It's often old ladies. Douglas Murray had a partial theory that it's just something to do. They just need some kind of purpose and meaning, and they attach themselves to being morally superior. Cognitive dissonance, yes, holding contradictory views. I think there's a difference between being able to consider contradictory reviews. Was it Aristotle? It was one of the Greek philosophers who said, a sign of intelligence, I think, it might be apocryphal, we'll see. I sometimes like using big words just to make myself sound photosynthesis. A sign of intelligence is the ability to consider, to hold two views in your mind and consider them without having to adopt it, or to hold an opposing view in your mind without adopting it, which is a great debate strategy. I was taught that back when I was a kid. It's good to know your opponent's argument more than they know it themselves. So if I'm going to debate somebody on an issue, half my research is refining my own argument. The other half is looking into their argument and what it's likely to be and trying to get in their head so I can predict their argument and counter it. Andrew Wilson's done that many times, where his opening statement, he's done it so many times, he can predict what their argument's going to be. And I'm sure he does their research. And his opening statement will be a refutation of everything they're about to say, right? It's fucking awesome. There was Christopher Hitchens once told a story about a lady who didn't want to read a book about an opposing view in case it changed her mind.
Australia, we have past tense, present tense, a rather sort of famous feminist activist in Grace Tame.
Oh my God.
Who has, sort of had a history of being sexually assaulted and sort of came out and did a bit of, ostensibly quite good political activism in that space, and then quite inexplicably decided to pivot and also stands in the front now of Australian, protests screaming, globalise the Intifada and other such nonsense. Also wearing the keffiyeh. Once again, pretty sure that if we were to globalise the Intifada, the resulting caliphate would not care much about, women's rights and things like that. So you get these radical leftist causes that are completely incompatible. But not only do they cluster together statistically, like, if you tend to support one, you tend to support the other, and we can sort of statistically measure that, individual people become extremely passionate about causes that are completely ideologically incompatible. You know, Grace Tame, Greta Thunberg. And so I think, you know, that in itself is a really interesting observation, and it's because the cause itself is not what's driving it. What's driving it is this moral superiority that you're talking about. They latch onto these causes, convinced that this makes them a good person, and they use that moral superiority to use these causes in, you know, incredibly nefarious ways. Like, you know, both the climate hysteria and the Free Palestine cause have both become highly toxic and highly harmful to society at large. And, you know, it's that sense of moral superiority that draws these radical leftists, whether it's, you know, extreme versions of feminism or gender ideology, climate, whatever it might be, it draws them to that. And it's not about the cause at all. It's got nothing to do with that. It's about the moral superiority.
That's what the narcissism of it. That's why I talked about that in relation to the narcissistic traits. It's that striving for your own status, and you don't really care about what you're screaming about, just what it does for you. So you're talking about a competitive strategy.
Just a moment. Hey, Marin, good to see you. You finally caught a stream. Yeah, you must be up late over there. But it's thanks for dropping in. Always good to see you.
Strategy, not the evolutionary adaptation of it, because as I understand it, evolutionary adaptation, it takes thousands of years, whereas the competitive strategy is something that we're hardwired to do. And we use whatever we have at our disposal in our society to get that done.
So that's a really interesting question. So if I sort of get what you're getting at correctly, the idea that, you know, these particular strategies that we're using now in this time and place don't look like the product of evolution because they're, you know, dealing with issues that are evolutionarily novel, that, you know, we can't possibly have evolved to adapt to, and things like
Fair
that.
enough.
So I have spent some time thinking about that, and what I think is the best way to sort of understand it is that what's been selected for, in terms, if we sort of bring the discussion back now to just sort of focusing a bit more on female competition and
actually, there we go. That's I forgot. Yeah, happy 250, you bastards. Happy 250. That's terrific. Here we go. Just for you guys. There we go, Marin. There we go. 1776, baby. 1776. I didn't catch any of the UFC fights, but I thought, what a great fucking idea. UFC on the front lawn. And I believe they had like a pretty full female card at the beginning of the like the card was a lot of female fighters, I believe, in the pre-fights. So yeah, fucking complain about that, feminists. Complain about that. Women using their bodily autonomy to use their bodies how they want, beating the shit out of each other on the lawn of the White House with Trump having a great time. I can see the feminist brains exploding. Well, you know, if we're going to do that for a second, I guess I better just make sure people don't get confused. We'll put one of those in there. Oh, me bloody, yeah, there we go. There, just so we know what's going on, okay? We've got a couple of Aussies over here celebrating the birthday of the wonderful US of A. There we go. All right, so let me, having had our little celebratory expression, we'll go back to the Emu Wars for the background. You can't see it, but behind her, if I remove it from the screen, I think, I don't know, maybe. We'll see. I can probably put it back. We're up to 34 minutes, so I can find it again. There we go. There's the so-called fake emu wars. We won, by the way. We won. I'll just put myself down so you can see the flag. Hang on. It was a hard-won fight, I can tell you. But for those who claim that the emus won, how many emus do you see live streaming right now? Okay. Don't worry, we got them. We got them.
And sort of manipulative reproductive suppression. What's been selected for is for women to target certain biological universals that will reliably lower birth rates in their rivals. And some of these universals you can sort of see, number one, very clearly they would always be biological universals, and you can see them playing out as the triggers of a lot of the feminist behavior that we see. So one of the biggest ones is sexual dimorphism. So sexual dimorphism, both in morphology, which is sort of where the term comes from, so just the physical differences between men and women, but also sex differences in behavior as well. So both in morphology and behavior, those basic differences between men and women are the bread and butter of the mating system. So what makes a man a good provider and a good father and a good husband is that he is masculine. And masculinity, by definition, are those aspects of men that are the most different from women.
Are we listening, children? We're getting an education here. We're getting an education. Are we listening? Yeah, sometimes, mate. Good to see you, Vintage. Yeah, I'm off work at the moment for a little bit. It's all good. Got a bit of time to hang out with our Aussie, American, and English friends. Bro. No. You see, there's beer and there's beer, right? There's beer and there's beer. Don't know. Can you see that? Can you see that? You see, there's beer and there's beer. The red ones are the real beers. The black ones are just to, have while I'm having a smoke on a Tuesday afternoon. So got fired. No, I didn't get fired, you fucker. Get out of here.
What makes a woman a good mother and a good wife and a good partner and a good nurturer is that she's feminine. So femininity is by definition those things that are least.
By the way, none of you tell anybody that I'm drinking Carlton Zero. I'll lose my Aussie card for sure. Fuck off, Vintage, you asshole.
Masculine, right? Femininity and masculinity are like polar opposites. And so the differences between the sexes is something that feminism will always, that the female manipulative reproductive suppression and thus feminism will always latch onto an attack. And so, this sort of became prominent, I think, sort of to me personally, way back in, I don't even know, I guess like the early 2000s-ish, I guess, maybe a bit later, sometime around there, when I was studying sex differences in spatial cognition, which should be of really, logically, should be of zero interest kind of really to anyone except the people studying it, right? It's theoretically interesting to understand why men and women, and I guess maybe it has real world practical implications as well. So
it sure does.
That require really, really advanced spatial cognition are probably going to be better suited for.
How about driving? Do you think having superior spatial cognition might help in driving a car? Might it help in tracking a baseball through the air and catching it? Do you think in boxing, having superior spatial recognition might help to hit your target and to see what's coming in?
men than women at the high end of the distribution. But generally speaking, you wouldn't expect this to necessarily be a flashpoint, and it was a massive flashpoint for feminists in the academy. So the small number of researchers who sort of began publishing on these reliable sex differences in spatial cognition, just getting attacked and pilloried by the feminists.
I saw a lecturer comment during a lecture that men on average are taller than women. And the audience, obviously full of feminists, laughed. They thought that was the most ridiculous thing to say.
Social scientists, it was like, why? What? But it's because they will attack anything that is sexually dimorphic. Any sex difference becomes unacceptable, because one great way to make a society completely hostile to reproductive success is to make that society intolerant of sex differences. If men and women are not able to occupy divergent and complementary roles, then they are unable to cooperate to successfully create a family. So when you have women out behaving like men, and that behavior is being applauded, and when you have men out behaving like women and that behavior is being applauded, then the basis of the human mate attraction system just begins to break down. And that's what we're seeing. And so a lot of feminism can be explained by, a really sort of simple mechanism by which women react adversely to any sort of expression or celebration of sexual dimorphism. And of course, sexual dimorphism is a very, very old evolutionary trait. So the propensity to react to that and to rally against it and to condemn it could certainly be very old evolutionarily. And we're just seeing that manifest using whatever cultural memes our society has available. And that explains a lot of feminism.
In which other sort of examples do we have that throughout? You mentioned Rome, other civilizations who fell where we saw something that we could equate with feminism, or was it another manifestation of intrasexual competition?
Not so much in terms of the sexual dimorphism specifically, although again that was seen a lot in Rome, with women moving up into the institutions and women moving up into sort of civic positions, and the feminist moves in, they didn't call them feminism, but moves to give women more economic freedom and more economic independence, and all of that all happened exactly in the same sort of way that we're seeing it happen now in Rome. So I don't have expertise across too many other societies that we can point to the attack on sexual dimorphism specifically, although I'm trying to think if I can come up with any examples. But the point about sexual dimorphism is more that what it does is, because it is evolutionarily very old, obviously sex differences predate the existence of humans, when humans were various bipedal apes. What it does do, though, is provide a very workable mechanism by which evolutionarily old intrasexual competitive motives could now be playing out. Because if the trigger of those is simply sexual dimorphism, condemn it, if that's effectively the mechanism, well, that accounts for a lot of what we're seeing now. So that accounts for the celebration of women being aggressive. It accounts for the condemnation of men being aggressive and the celebration of men becoming passive and emasculated. And it accounts for the condemnation of women being beautiful and wearing makeup and doing things that attract men. It accounts for the condemnation of women choosing to stay home and raise families while men go out to work, because that's complementary divergence of roles. So it accounts for...
I remember a while ago, there was an ad in, I think it was Sweden. It was in one of the Scandinavian companies. It was a Volvo ad. And they had a Volvo driving by, and in the background, they had a woman with a pram with a baby in it sitting on a park bench. Not a word of a lie. People complained about it because it was promoting harmful gender stereotypes. You can't make this shit up.
Huge amount of what sort of is done under the banner of feminism, and all of those things will all negatively contribute to overall reproductive success, both at the society level and of any individuals who choose to embrace those particular decisions in their own lives as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think when I think about it, my resistance to the theory is that removal of agency. Is that, we tell men all the time, stop watching porn. It's the same, right? You watch, you pushing the button, you watch,
I said that
watching more
before.
porn, and we tell them stop watching porn. And so that, I think, is my resistance to this.
Stop making porn. How about that? That'd be a solution. If you want to eradicate a drug problem, do you go after the users or do you go after the suppliers?
Yes.
I think that's an understandable resistance. I think the observation that birth rates are declining globally, I think, supports the notion that it's a manipulative reproductive suppression, because even though my argument is that feminism is manipulative reproductive suppression, that's what it is, but that's not the only way that reproductive suppression manifests. So if reproductive suppression is a human universal, which it's not just a human universal, it's a animal universal, like intrasexual competition, and that's not a human thing. This is something that sexually reproducing species do. So we would expect to see this happening. And of course, the world becomes more global, then obviously there are still differences between countries, but we're starting to see, instead of this being like isolated populations and isolated societies and civilizations going through these cycles completely independent of each other, because we live in such a global world where we are now communicating. There's not just gene flow between populations, there's communication of information and memes and behaviors and all things across populations. So you're kind of seeing the whole world come into sync. So we're all going through the birth rate decline together. So I don't necessarily think that observing it in places that are not especially feminist is a problem for the intersexual competition theory, because it has to be universal. It should be seen in places that aren't feminist as well. It just is called different things. But I do appreciate the resistance against the idea that, the resistance to the idea that we lack the agency, that this implies that we lack agency. And I'm not going to refute that, because I actually think that this does imply not just that women lack agency, but that people actually lack agency. So, and I think that's one of the fundamental sources of resistance that people have to evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, no shit. That's exactly what I was saying before. First of all, it's a lot of it's inductive. Things are the way they are, and therefore we look at the phenomena occurring and we draw lines between them and we work it backwards to find a what you might call a cause. But then you also get an implied ontology built into it, that it's working towards something, and it removes agency. It pretty much boils down to, the genes, through random processes, are producing everything. They're driving our motivations. They're behind our decisions. And you can really take any phenomena that occurs and apply the same principle. You could say, why was monogamy so? Where did monogamy come from? Well, you can say, well, evolutionarily there was this process, and you can build up a reason. The fact it exists means that if you assume evolution is the driving force, then the fact it exists means that evolution must have produced it, and then you can work backwards to sort of square that circle. It's interesting to hear. I've heard this argument before where people have said, if we are the result of chemical processes, and including our thinking, then why should you think I'm making sense? Why should thinking and talking matter? Right. Well, it seems to me it does. Right. So that's where she's actually admitting what I was kind of getting at before.
They're uncomfortable with the notion that maybe they're not engaging in the behaviors they're engaging for the reasons they think they're engaging in them. And that's something that some people find interesting, and it's something that other people find deeply uncomfortable, and most people sit somewhere in.
I think it could be fair to say that we don't fully understand our own motivations often. That could be fair enough. We don't know why we do things, or we don't know why we feel a certain way, but it doesn't mean that we have no agency or no will. as far as I can tell.
Between those two things. But I think it is likely the case that the majority of the behavior that we engage in, we don't really understand why we do it. And even if we attempt to interrogate ourselves to understand why we do it, the answers won't be available to us. They're not there, you know, they're not accessible to our consciousness, because the phenomenon of consciousness itself, which is, you know, not something that I would say is well understood. There's no scientific consensus about what it is or what it's for, but there is at least sort of or ought to be, certainly amongst evolutionary psychologists and evolutionary biologists, that whatever consciousness is for, it's not there for fun. It's not there because it creates beautiful experiences. It's not there because it's a wonderful, sacred, special thing. It is a wonderful, sacred, special thing, and it does create beautiful experiences, but that's not why it exists. It exists to serve a purpose. And so whatever that purpose might be, that will shape what information about ourselves we have conscious access to and what information we don't. Now,
I'm not sure that actually made sense. I'm not going to go back and re-listen to it, but I couldn't follow that. It sounds a little bit like she's trying. Well, first of all, she's correct. There's no consensus on what consciousness is. I believe in philosophy it's known as the hard problem. What is consciousness? I've heard some definitions such as it's the awareness of being conscious, or it's something like that. But she's kind of sitting on the fence here, saying that, you know, we don't have agency, and yet we do have consciousness, and yet consciousness isn't what we think it's for, and yet it does kind of produce the things that we don't think it's for. It didn't really make a lot of sense.
Much of female intrasexual competition is very nasty. Feminism is very nasty. We've spoken about the toxin that is this notion of moral superiority that people can use to rationalize terrible behaviors. But much of sort of reproductive suppression doesn't manifest in a way that would be recognized as nasty by either the person engaging in it or the target. So, you know, when women are sitting down discussing what they should do with their friends, individual women are not thinking, well, I'm going to get married, but I'm going to tell my friends that I think they should focus on their careers, because that means that I'll have more babies than them. That's not what they're thinking. They're just talking through. And it just feels like when they think about their own situation, it feels like the right decision for them is maybe to step away from the career and to start a family. But when they think about their friend's situation, it just feels like their friend's career might be more important or valuable than their own. And it just feels like the right advice to give is, I think you should invest in your career a bit longer and wait a little bit more. And neither the person giving that information nor the person receiving it perceives or feels or suspects that there could be anything nefarious in those motives. And no matter how much introspection they engage in, they're not going to find those nefarious motives because they're not there, right? They're not available to conscious awareness. So we've been selected to behave in ways, ultimately, I mean, sometimes there's quite complicated pathways to that reproductive success. It's not always a straight line, but ultimately we've selected to behave in ways because in the past, on balance across your lifetime, those behaviors have ultimately boosted your reproductive success and or the reproductive success of the rivals around you. And that's, you know, it's largely an inescapable fact. So it doesn't mean that we don't feel like we're behaving under our own agency. It doesn't mean that we, you know, that there are not genuine individual differences between people in terms of, you know, how pro-social you are and how much you respect others and how kind you are. It doesn't mean that you're not actually a good person, and it doesn't mean that there are other people out there who are not actually bad people who do terrible things. I don't think that the lack of sort of the lack of agency that we're forced to concede in order to understand how behavior works, I don't think that necessarily sort of strips away the notion that, you know, there are still good people who deserve kudos. And
she's getting a bit tangled up in a free will question here. That's basically it, because she's made a case basically that we don't have free will, that we're sort of driven and motivated by our genetic makeup and evolutionary processes, but she's trying to explain kind of that we do have free will. This is getting a little bit weak compared to what she was speaking about before.
Credit for being
Well, it's a natural conclusion of what she was speaking about before. Anyway, interesting.
good, and there are still absolutely bad people who deserve, you know, punishment and confinement for being bad. It's just that the reasons why they're good and bad is probably not just because they decided to. You know, the reasons are much more complicated than that. But yeah, look, I can't argue with the lack of agency, because ultimately I agree with you. I think that is the implication of the theory, that it actually implies a lack of agency. But that's kind of true of all evolutionary theories of behavior. Ultimately, they imply
And we will do what we need to do to propel our own genetic lineage and our own sort of reproductive success. But how is then the feminist ideology different from other ideologies? Were they also intrasexual competition, like Marxism, or is that something else?
I don't think that there's something else. I think they are also similar types of, it's kind of like the omnichores I was talking before, how it all kinds of melds together. And I think that they are all sort of manifestations, maybe not exactly the same, but very similar psychological mechanisms at play. They've just been fed a slightly different, you know, social or cultural diet. And so they've come out, you know, to champion a slightly different cause. But ultimately those causes end up sort of focusing on limiting female reproductive success. So I've got a data set that I'm actually analysing and writing up right now that's demonstrating the link between pro-environmentalism and antenatal attitudes. And so even, you know, the pro-environmental sort of movement, if you like, even that has bent around before too long to being both sort of civilizational destroying. So the pro-environmental net zero movement is just tanking entire economies, and it's being allowed to do that. And it's also bending itself around now to becoming, you know, directly antenatal, not just indirectly antenatal by tanking the economy, but it's now becoming directly antenatal. So
again, to sort of refer to Jordan Peterson, he addressed this with the people who think the world is, you know, it's got too many people, we need less people. And fucking hell, he started out by saying, well, you could you could contribute, because he always says, which people? If you think the world should have less people, which people are you talking about? And he says, you know, if you want to start, get the ball rolling.
Rhetoric is starting to build up about, you know, you shouldn't have children because that creates your, you know, overall climate, your overall carbon footprint, and, you know, it's bad for the environment to have children. It would be better if people just didn't. And so you're starting to see that rhetoric start to come out, you know, online and in blogs and whatever. And so I went and measured it, and yes, it's measurable and detectable, and it's there. There is that relationship between pro-environmental attitudes, and it is related to people's political orientation. So there is that bending of the pro-environmental movement toward antinatalism. And I think all of these ideologies are all bending towards that antinatalism, and they're all the left-wing ideology. So it's not a coincidence that sort of leftist progressive ideologies bend towards antinatalism and conservative ideologies bend towards pronatalism, because as societies get older, they become more what we call, even though again the term left wing is a quite new term, for like historically speaking it's relatively new, right? But you can see the progression across societies. You can see the progression of conservatism to progressivism. You can see it reflected in the art, and you can see it reflected in the social norms, and you can see it reflected in a number of things the way we're seeing it now. And the reason for that is because as a society, you know, begins to effectively pack itself up and go home, it becomes more and more progressive. And so it's not just that you have this stable individual difference where about half the people are conservative and about half the people are progressive, and they have elections each year and it kind of goes back and forth. The entire population is actually shifting towards progressivism. So the conservatives
Yeah.
now are not as conservative as they were 40 years ago,
absolutely.
right? And the progressives now, of course, are much more progressive. And so the very notion of political orientation is this mechanism in practice that's just measuring the individual difference of how far along this continuum any individual person is. And so that the far left progressives are the ones that are sort of like at the front of this civilizational decline, and the conservatives are the ones who are, at the back of it. And that's just that individual difference, and that accounts for much of political orientation, which is one of the main reasons why I'm trying to look now at birth rate decline and pro-environmentalism and political orientation and various other ideologies, and link them all in together. So I think that is probably a big explanation for the, what we call the left-right distinction between progressivism and conservatism.
So this isn't something that we can really deprogram, you think? This is our hardware, and then we end up with then what Ed Dutton was talking about. We had him on here before, that it cycles, and
I have to admit, they're kind of losing me at this stage. Dr. Danny Sulikowski, her area of strength is evolutionary biology, and it sounds like it crosses over into evo-psych. K2, haven't seen you for a while, dickhead. Now they're getting into politics, and it sounds like neither of them are very clear on what they're talking about. So I'm not really tracking it now. The video only had another 15 minutes to go, but I think really the value in it was what we've already seen. Excuse me. So I reckon we'll not worry about that for now. We've probably heard enough. Which really brings me to the end of what I was here to talk about. Just doing a check. Got a few likes. Thank you, guys. That's nice of you. Had a few people sort of dropping in and dropping out. Even just dropping in to say g'day. It's always nice. I haven't prepared anything else to go beyond this. It was just something that caught my attention, and felt like doing a bit of a stream and give it a bit of a review. It was interesting. I think a little bit thought-provoking, but at the same time, I could say I discuss what I think are the flaws or the shortfalls of her perspective, mainly, which is the idea that her theory does remove the idea of agency. She did try to counter that unsuccessfully. So, fair call to her, but mostly I'm impressed by how openly she's prepared to speak about some pretty hot topics around the world, and particularly here in Australia. I've seen other academics and commentators who have spoken about similar things, and they've been hounded out of town, and they've been sacked, and they've been kudos to James Sturt University, where she lectures, because she seems to have a platform. And I think a platform for common sense in today's society, especially in Australia, is actually pretty good. Thank you, Mr. Ben Spastic, for that for those words of wisdom. Well, what should we do? Should we watch something else, or should we call it a day, and maybe a bit later on I could do a open panel or something, or a little bit of fun a bit later on? I know as the evening goes on, it's getting way past the bedtime for our American friends and coming up to breakfast for our English friends. I know normally in the afternoons here in Australia, not a lot of people around, because they're all well, in bed, either going to bed or getting out of bed. So that's all fair enough. If you are watching and you haven't subscribed, we've hit 222. It's always nice to pick up one or two now and then. I don't know where Vintage is at with his. He's chasing me. He's doing a pretty good job, actually. I'm going to go and have a look. See where he's at. Because he's been killing it with the subscriptions. Isn't that funny? It's hard to find him. Really strange. There he is. You'd have to ask his mum. 130 subscribers. He is catching me in a short amount of time. Good work. Good work, mate. Just seeing what else is going on. It's just a lazy afternoon. Just seeing if anything's happening around the place. Not a lot. G'day from SA. G'day from Victoria. Just checking out what's going on. You reckon that's the Americans' fault, mate? You reckon we didn't have a bit of it ourselves? Not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, I could probably concede that. But it's certainly swept the globe, eh? Seems to be a mess everywhere. Oh, I can see Savannah Craven has a new one up. It's a bit of a pro-choice. Here we go. David, g'day from our 10 on an overnight train. From our 10 on an overnight train from London to Inverness in Scotland. Oh, you go northway. Have you got like earplugs in, or are you watching on the screen? What's going on? Could just about encourage me to pivot to something else to watch. I mean, this one, you see, I do this where I'll do a stream about a particular video. Oh, I've been down and going back up. Gotcha. Got the buds in. Okay, the Bud Lights. So, yeah, I do this where I'll do a video on a particular subject. This one was feminism versus intra-sexual competition between women. We got into evolution and Evo Psych. 97th birthday. Crikey, that's a pretty good innings. 97 not out. That's awesome. And then I get a few people sort of come into chat and I feel like hanging around and we need something else to watch. And then I'll find some other video, and that video has nothing to do with the original video. And then so if people watch it later and hang out, they start by going, yeah, I see what you were doing there. But then it become about something else. What the fuck's going on? You're confusing people. What the hell? We'll do it anyway. I don't feel like wrapping up yet. We'll watch a bit of Savannah Craven from her Patriot Voice. So apparently she went to Pride during Pride Month. Wokeness is more colonial patriarchy than what we had. It's just distorted everything, mate. It's just distorted everything. All right, let's. This one might even. Well, I was going to say this one might even get me in trouble with YouTube, but given that I'm actually watching the video is already on there, and I'm just reviewing it. We'll probably be all right. Do I want to get into a different topic at this stage? Oh, I'm in two minds, boys. I've got cognitive dissonance. Panchuchini is still there. I've got cognitive dissonance. Maybe what I'll do is I'll wrap this one up. And then maybe a bit later on today, I'll maybe do another one. Just so we keep each stream to be on a particular topic. I think that mightn't be a bad idea. So it is what it says on the box. We'll leave it at that, eh? Might come back and tackle Savannah's video. See if I can find some other ones to make up a show. And we'll do that. Raid to Elder. What's he doing? Well, I can't do a raid, mate. I'm not monetized. It has to be a ghetto raid. What's Elderline doing? Is he doing a gaming thing? I see Teriak's live too. He went live a second before I went live. I was setting up to go on, and I'm getting all these notifications saying that Teriak's going live, and I thought, oh well, there goes most of my audience. I'm just trying to find the bastard. He's doing food. Hangout stream talking about the nature of the internet and of beauty. Well, that was cool, but he's doing food. I can see it. He's doing cooking. What the hell happened? So what's going on, K2? What's the subject matter going on over there? Anyway, K2, if you want to post a link, I'm pretty sure you can, to Elder Lions. I don't think no, I should be able to. Okay, for those who are still watching, David, thanks for dropping in just at the end as we're about to wrap up. I might stream again a little bit later on. We'll see how the afternoon goes. If anybody wants somewhere to go and check out Elder Lion. He's a good bloke. I haven't caught many of his streams. They're often gaming streams. But, oh, hell, I think he's wrapping up. Is he wrapping up? Oh, no, he's still going. Okay. All right, here we go. We'll try it here. If I try and post it in StreamYard, YouTube gets upset. And I can't post in his because it's subscribers only. So he's kind of making it hard for me. Well, what if I subscribe? He's probably doing it to stop trolls. We'll try that. Oh no, I'm not trying to link in his. I'm trying to link in mine. What the fuck am I doing? Shit. At a moment. Okay. I want to put it in there. We'll try it. There we go. There's the link. So if you guys want somewhere to go for a little bit, go and see what Elderline's doing. Maybe I'll drop in the chat and say good day. Oh, David got it too. What did David link to? What the hell did I link to? Holy shit. What the hell did I just link to? Yeah, same thing. Just got a different URL. Oh, now we have 6 in. We have 6 in. We have more people turning up, and we're just about to wrap up and send people over to Elderlines for a bit. I might see you guys a little bit later on. Fair chance I might boot it up again. Yeah, you take it easy too, Dave. Always good to see you, mate. I'll let that sit for a little bit. I'll play the I'll play our favorite outro song just while just poke a bit of fun at myself while you guys have time to hit the link. If I can find it. If I can find it. No, I'll tell you what we'll do. Since David just got here, no, we'll play this one. All right, guys. I'll catch you all later.
They call me the God, the long way Kieran man. Fake Australian down by the beach, with my cowboy hat on and Bud Light in reach. They ask me if I'm gay, I say no way, while me wave that rainbow flag. Only some days me dress in drag. I don't know why they wouldn't think I'm straight. I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? Some come to feel that island beat. I just come to feel the guy they meet, riding kangaroos bareback with dudes. If the emus come, we'll surely lose. Shrimp on the Barbie, 6 dicks is a party. Tinfoil at his McFly at the Marty. I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay? I think the only thing we can say, why is Kieran gay?
Oi, we're just leaving, dickhead. What the hell? I just did a nice sign off, said goodnight to everyone, posted the link for Elderline's channel. And now you turn up. Might be on later, mate. Still deciding. Might get back on a little bit later on. Always good to see you dropping by. All right, guys, I'll catch you all later. Well, now you've got to do a show. Yeah, a bit later, maybe. What do you mean do a show? I just did a show. You're talking now, or you're saying because I said I'm going to do it later, maybe, that now I've got to do it? No. I don't even know what that means, mate. Really trying to get out of here. All right, signing off. I'll catch you guys perhaps a little bit later. We'll see how we go. Maybe sooner than later. You never know. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you soon.